All right, I think we can go ahead and get started right now. Um, all right, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on our presentation on how to write a successful medical school personal statement. I hope that we can provide you with some great actionable tips on how you can improve your medical school application. We are also streaming this video live on Facebook, so feel free to go ahead and check it out there if you'd like. First, we're going to get started with some introductions. So my name is Grace Kennedy, and I am a graduate coach at Ingenious Prep. I'm originally from Newport Beach in Southern California. I went to Stanford University for my undergrad, where I was a science, technology, and society major. There, I also played varsity volleyball for 3 years, and I was also a peer mentor for my major, and I helped students navigate their college experience. I'm super excited to be here tonight with Ariana, who is a former admissions committee member from Harvard. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ariana. I'm currently a general surgery resident at Georgetown University Hospital. I grew up on the Central Coast of California. I went to UCLA for undergrad. I studied political science and French and had no interest in going into medicine whatsoever. Right after I graduated from school with a degree in political science and French, I joined the Peace Corps, where I served as a health education volunteer in Northwest Africa for 2.5 years, and that kind of ultimately changed my whole trajectory in life. So after that, I worked for a nonprofit for a couple of years, then I did a post-bac program at Johns Hopkins, and then I did some substance abuse research for another 2 years before going to Harvard Medical School. As Grace mentioned, I worked as a admissions committee member while I was there, which was a lot of fun. And I have mentored tons of people, both, all the way from college till now, in lots of application cycles, again, from college until now medical school and even residency applications. And I've been officially working with Ingenious Prep. This is my 3rd application cycle that I've been working as a former admissions officer.
Great, thank you. All right, so here's what we're going to cover today. First, some introductions. I'm going to go over who we are and what we do at Ingenious Prep. Next, Ariana is going to take over and talk about how applications are processed and compared, what former admissions officers look for in applications, and some essay strategies that you can implement into your medical school personal statement. So here's a look of who Ingenious Prep is. We have former admissions officers like Ariana from a suite of top schools such as Stanford, Harvard, UCSF, Johns Hopkins, plenty of different schools. These are people that actually made admissions decisions and decided whether a student gets into their medical school or not. Our former admissions officers work directly with our student to help craft all parts of their application. We also have a team of graduate coaches. These are people who graduated from top universities and then went on to top medical schools. They're trained writers and editors, and they help us edit our students' applications and draft all different parts of their applications. They are incredibly driven, smart, and creative individuals. We also have a network of professors from some top universities and PhD students and researchers that help our students as well. Over our many years, we have also compiled a ton of different data. When we are looking into this data, we look at not just the MCAT score and the GPA, but we take a very holistic approach, just like the admissions officers do in a medical school admissions office. We look at different variables such as what type of activities students are pursuing, as well as what they wrote their personal statement topic on. So yeah, all of this has led to some really great results. In the past, some of our students have gotten into Harvard, Stanford, UCSF, Johns Hopkins, all of the above. So yeah, here's a look at some of our counselors. We have our former admissions officers, Dr. Danella, who is a former admissions committee member from Harvard, Adam from Yale Med, and then our graduate coaches below, Molly, who went to Harvard for both her undergrad and her medical school degree. Same with Mitt, who is currently, or he went to Dartmouth and then is currently at UPenn trying to pursue his medical school degree. So yeah, now I'm going to pass it off to Ariana, and she is going to talk about some admissions data as well as how applications are processed and compared.
All right, so first thing that I'm going to talk about, as Grace said, is I'm just going to talk a little bit about the admissions process itself. And so if you look at all the data today, less than 50% of all applicants get accepted to medical school. So as you can imagine with this data, the application process is becoming more and more competitive every year. In fact, if you look at like the very top schools in terms of applying to medical school, the acceptance rates are much lower than 50%. They're at 6.9% across the whole 115 ranked medical schools. So it's the whole medical school process is one in which you really want as much guidance as possible to try and make your application as strong as possible in order to get you into the best school at this point. So we're going to have some interactive questions occasionally throughout this, but here's one of the first ones. True or false, do you guys think schools have an algorithm to determine who is accepted or rejected?
You can write your answer in the chat function of the box. Okay. Okay, we got kind of all over the board.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. So there are people who think this is true, and there are people who think this is false, and that's exactly why we're here today, so that we can talk about some of these things. So I would say in general that is false. There is no algorithm. There are definitely schools that have cutoffs for things. There are schools that are like, we're not going to accept anyone below this GPA, we're not going to accept anyone below this MCAT score, things like that. But in general, when it comes to the actual decisions on who is going to attend a particular school, it comes down to a whole story. It comes down to looking at the entire application that the candidate has sent in and comparing that to the other applicants sitting around them. So I'm not sure how many of you know all the steps that take place once you actually push submit on your AMCAS application, but we're going to talk briefly about that now. So you're going to submit your application, and you should know that your application is not going to be screened once or twice, but probably many, many times as it goes through the process at these different schools. So a lot of times what happens is you submit your application and it goes through a pre-screening process. And this is where, like I was saying before, if schools have a GPA cutoff or something like that, certain applications might be excluded at this point. The applications that are not excluded, they'll be divvied out to a series of different admissions officers who have to read these applications. A lot of times that the same application will be seen by 2 or 3 readers, and they have to come to a consensus on whether or not this person should continue to be considered for the school, or if at that point they just want to reject the candidate. After that has happened, there's still more to go through. So a lot of times, either you will be invited to an interview at that point, or you'll have even a larger committee that reads your application, and then they decide after that whether or not you're going to be invited for an interview. Either way, if you are invited for an interview, then what's going to happen is you're probably going to be interviewed by multiple people. Afterwards, those people are going to either write down their thoughts about you, or they're going to go into a room and discuss their thoughts with you with a larger group of people. And that group of people will discuss it with a different group of people even further on. So I can tell you at Harvard, there were about 6 different stages where every applicant was evaluated. Sorry. So sorry, I have something in my throat. There were about 6 different stages where the students were evaluated by large groups of people that had to determine, based on your entire story, what do we think? Do we think that you would be a great addition to our class? Do you think that you're a really strong applicant, but that there are a lot of other people who might be on par with you? Or is this somebody where we're going to have a hard pass at this point? So the takeaway from all of this is that there are multiple steps, and you should be able to make a strong impression at each of these steps. And that means that there are certain things that need to stand out in your application. You know, obviously, once you get to the interview, the most important thing is going to be you as a person, your personality shining through, and being able to convey that you're a genuine candidate who's really interested in a particular medical school and contributing to the medical profession. But up until the point where they meet you in person, there just has to be something about your application where, when it sits amongst the 8,000 other applications that schools are going to read through, that they're going to think, yes, this is the one. This is the person we have to interview now. So do you guys think this is true or false? Admissions officers spend more time reading better essays and may skim worse essays. Yeah, so again, we're getting like a pretty good mix here.
Yeah.
And I think you guys should just think of this, maybe you guys are all better students than I was when I was in college, but I want you to imagine that you are taking a class and you're super overwhelmed and you have way more work than you can possibly get done in the night. And you have a textbook that's super dry and boring. And then you have this other article that you're supposed to read for a different class that you absolutely love, that's like completely intriguing and keeps your interest. I think a lot of times if you're in this situation, you're going to find yourself just sort of skimming this dry, boring textbook that you've been assigned. And the reality is that the people who are selected to review your applications, these are people who are the deans of the medical school. They are busy doing things all day long. And then in addition to that, they are going through hundreds of applications of medical school candidates. They're students who are getting hammered with biology exams and physiology exams, et cetera, et cetera. So every single person who's going to read your essay, pretty much none of them is it their exclusive job to read your essay, okay? So if it is definitely true that people will skim essays, and your job is to make an essay that's compelling enough that it makes me want to stop and say, this is something that I actually want to read. This is something I want to slow down for and actually take in, as opposed to just kind of be like, yeah. So in order to help you make a personal statement that will actually stand out, we're going to just go through some of the highlights of things that you should consider when you're doing the personal statement. And this is one of the things that I think Ingenious Prep is particularly good at, is helping you hone not just your personal statement, but actually your entire written application, so that you can, again, present yourself as the best candidate possible when you're applying to these medical schools. So I'm not sure how many of you guys have already looked into this, but for the personal statement, there are some limitations. There's a 5,300 character space limitation, which is approximately 1 page. And there's also a sort of running timeline when you can submit your AMCAS application, but we would recommend that you submit at the very beginning of June. In fact, for the most part, there are very few exceptions to this, but I would recommend that you hit submit on the date that the AMCAS opens. So the job of a personal statement, unfortunately, in some ways, it's quite large. There are many things that you have to do, and you have 1 page to do it in. So these are some of the things that we expect you to do in your personal statement. You need to tell us, and by tell us, I actually mean show us who you are, You need to show us why medicine. You need to show us that you're passionate about the field of medicine, that you have qualifications that are going to make you a great future doctor and also a great colleague to all of your friends who will be joining you at this school. We want you to show your personality, and also we want to show us how your entire application fits together. So a lot of people who apply to medicine, they have very diverse interests, and that means that they've had a lot of really great experiences that are all over the board, and that's amazing. However, your personal statement is the time where you can kind of tie all of those things together and show us who is the takeaway person. What's the takeaway message that we should get from your application, even if it doesn't quite make sense if you were to just look at all of the individual pieces. And most importantly here, like I said at the very beginning, you want to show us all of these things as opposed to tell us. You don't need to write, I am compassionate. You need to show me a story in which you were compassionate and I can walk away from the story being like, wow, that person really cares, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously, this is a lot to accomplish in just one page. And that's why whether you go with Ingenious Prep or not, honing this personal statement will be a major task for you during the application process. And you really have to take it upon yourself to find people who will be able to help you edit, help you read, help you proofread, etc., so that when you're submitting, you are submitting an exceptional piece of writing that also highlights that you are a strong communicator. So something that we talk about a lot at Ingenious Prep is the idea of this Holy Trinity. And so these are kind of three things that you need to keep in mind while writing your personal statement. So the Holy Trinity, as we would describe it, would be you. Remember, this is a personal statement. Lots of people tell stories during their personal statement. And a lot of times those stories involve somebody else who got sick, somebody else who made an impression on you when you were a little kid. That's great. That's fine. But at the end of the day, if you don't tell me about you during your personal statement, I don't care about the other person, you know. You also have to convey your passion for medicine and then your qualifications as a future physician. So again, this is going back to what I was just kind of saying. The personal statement, the idea of the personal statement is that it's personal. It should be about you. If it's not about you, it isn't a personal statement. And then, as I was also saying before, you want your personal statement to be the thing that ties your entire application together. So you don't want anybody reading your personal statement and being more confused about who you are. You want them to read your personal statement and be like, oh, this is Johnny. Johnny is the person who's going to contribute to the research side of our school. Sally's the type of person who's going to be the leader and who's going to take on, you know, the many discrepancies that exist between healthcare access in different parts of the world. Whatever it is, you have to pick your thing and you have to show us in your personal statement that this is who you are and this is how you're going to contribute to the coming class. It's hard because so many people that are applying to medical school at this point, I mean, you guys are all just brilliant and overqualified, to be totally honest. Every day I get happier that I'm not competing against the people who are applying to medical school now. But you have to figure out the things that make you stand out as an applicant during this whole thing and come across as likable and interesting. So there's a lot to accomplish when talking about yourself. And then, of course, you need to address your passion for medicine. So a lot of times people will say things like, you know, I grew up and I loved science, and so I want to be a doctor. And yes, there is a lot of science in medicine, but you have to show us that you're truly passionate about the medicine part. The medicine part is about healing and touching people and connecting to people. And we want to see that you have thought about this and that you are making a mature decision to enter the medical profession. So the way that you might want to address this in your personal statement to start is just by thinking about why you are passionate about medicine. And we usually guide our students to ask themselves a lot of questions until they're able to come to, I'm so sorry, you guys, I just have this thing stuck in my throat. Hold on one second. So a lot of times people have a really hard time explaining exactly why they want to go into medicine. Some of you, I'm sure, decided that you wanted to go into medicine when you were like 3 years old and you saw a toy stethoscope for the first time, and that's totally fine. But on your personal statement, you really need to be introspective and you need to think about these things. And so we'll give you guys like a series of questions that can kind of help you come up with the real reason or exactly how you're going to present your interest in medicine. So things like, when did you first know that you wanted to become a doctor? Why did you know that at that point? If you couldn't be a doctor, what would you do? That often gets people thinking about the very reasons that they actually want to be a doctor, because you have to think about what other job would I even consider? Going through this process of just asking yourself these questions actually oftentimes really clarifies things and enables you to write a personal statement that's a lot more clear both to you and to the reader. And then, of course, we want to hear about your qualifications as a future physician. And again, I can't highlight this enough. It's not that you need to tell us what your qualifications are necessarily. You should show us. You should be telling us about yourself in a way that makes us think this person is compassionate, kind, mature, interesting, intelligent, inquisitive. These are the things that we want to get from your personal statement. And again, this is just sort of a list of some of those adjectives that I just said that really make you stand out and make us think, okay, this person is somebody who's going to contribute to a larger pool of people who are going to form a class at a particular school. So these are just some examples of some people who, some stories of some applicants where they've kind of had multiple things happen in their life, and putting this together into a personal statement in a cohesive way is exactly what we want to look for in all of your personal statements. So for example, this person, maybe she was raised by a single mom, and that influenced her to take a feminism class, and then that influenced her to volunteer as a health worker at a local STI clinic. And through this, she also became involved in a pro-queer advocacy group, and then lobbied in Sacramento and led rallies at local schools. And so we want to see how these different major things in your life have kind of come to happen and how they've all kind of led you to going into medicine at the end of this. This is another person who, he grew up playing Sega with his older brothers, actually majored in gaming, something totally different than medicine, actually competed in national gaming symposia, and then, went through a tragedy within his family, which actually completely changed his trajectory, made him more interested in medicine, and, got him interested in the human side of health. And, this sort of twist is obviously something that's going to make this candidate really stand out. And then, this candidate here, we have a dad. He's an avid environmentalist. He meets an an eco-mechanic that becomes his friend. They start brewing biodiesel with the neighbors. They start a local club for skill sharing and troubleshooting. They have a do-it-yourself class, and then ultimately they publish this work in a journal. So none of these things really have anything to do with medicine, but what this does show me is that this is somebody who has a passion, who's willing to follow through on things, who's willing to be a leader in their community, whatever community that is, and is going to advance medicine or whatever field this person goes into based on his ability to, publish in journals and actually collect data. So the takeaway from all of this should really be that your personal statement, it has to show who you are, it has to address why you want to be a doctor, and it has to show us why you're going to be a good doctor. So these are common topics that we see a lot. These are great topics. I think they're topics that you can definitely rely on in terms of themes that are going to make you sound mature as an applicant and are going to highlight things that we want to see. So a lot of applicants, they talk about personal growth, they talk about notable achievements, adversity they faced, international travel, childhood stories, or passion projects. And those are often great ways to highlight certain aspects of your personality, certain aspects of your strengths, in order to tell a more inclusive story about yourself. And these are some of the themes that we see. There's I like working with people. There's the I like science. There's family members who have gotten sick. There are the actual applicants who have gotten sick. There's the, I've been dreaming of being a doctor my whole life. And then there's the, I never wanted to be a doctor. And then I had this transformative experience. And again, these are common themes. They're themes that you can certainly use to guide your essay. But I think that there's also a lot out there that you can explore to make you stand out even more. So there are always some common pitfalls that people go through when they're writing their personal statement. One of the biggest things is just rewriting your experience list. So when you're applying for medical school, you're going to have the opportunity to list out, I think it's 15 different activities that you've participated in. And what your personal statement absolutely should not be is just an extension of this. It should not say, oh, I ran this club, and then I ran that club, and then I did track. Like, that is not what this essay should be. The essay should be highlighting particular things that really aren't highlighted in your experience list and bringing them to the forefront in order to really tell us who you are, so that when we're looking at this 30-page application, which is basically what it prints out to be, we have something that we can really say, this is who this person is. Some other common pitfalls are exaggerating adversity. I know that every single person has struggled. We all have struggle, but certainly I think we should acknowledge that certain people struggle a lot more than others. So if your biggest adversity was, trying to get over the C that you got in a class, that's not something that, even though that might have been a very transformative experience for you, and I don't want to belittle that experience at all, you're going to be competing against people who lived in their car, people who traveled from different countries and grew up, without their family here, people who didn't speak any English and were here at 15 for the first time, all sorts of things. So don't try and exaggerate the adversity that you've overcome if that's not really your strength. Again, save the diversity for the diverse candidates. This says leave high school in the past. In general, I would agree with this. However, if there is something monumental that happened to you in high school or even earlier that really changed your trajectory, I think that there are ways that you can touch on that, and you can work with your admissions officer and with your graduate coach in order to figure out exactly how to incorporate those things. You're not a doctor yet, so don't act like one. This isn't the time to be diagnosing things or trying to use, medical terms exclusively. Don't criticize other professions. We don't want to know that you became a doctor because you hated everything else. We just want to know about why you loved medicine. Again, the injured athlete, I don't think that this is a hard know. I think a lot of people have had these experiences, and I think that being an athlete gives you a lot of strengths that will make you a great medical school candidate. But just know this is something that is often used, and that theme in and of itself will not be unique. And then the international sojourn versus tropical vacation. Just remember that some of the people who are applying to medical school have lived abroad for extensive periods of time. So if you are going to talk about something that happened while you were abroad that changed your life, and then I'm looking at your paper and I realize that you were only abroad for a week or 2 weeks or something like that, I'm going to take that into consideration when you're telling me your story. So just make sure, again, that you're not exaggerating events that have happened to you in your life. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about applying these lessons to your personal statement. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to pick a topic. And this can honestly be one of the hardest parts, again, largely because, as we've already discussed a little bit, many of you, I'm sure, have a lot of really diverse interests, and I'm sure you've all had a lot of great experiences in your life that you could write about. So how do you come up with the best topic? Every person is different when it comes to writing. Some people, things just come to them naturally, but if you aren't somebody where the ideas are just flowing directly to the pen, then I think that there are a bunch of different strategies that you can try. And one of those things is just writing down whatever comes into your head and then figuring it out later. One thing is the one-liner. This is something that I really like, especially when we're talking about like explaining your activities, is if you can come up with a one-liner that explains why you're applying to medical school, then that one-liner in and of itself will often tell you exactly where you need to go in your personal statement in order to get to the crux of your personal statement. Reimagining the question. This is kind of going back to some of those questions that we showed earlier. Why are you going into medicine? When did you want to go into medicine? Things like that. And then also sometimes people just get ideas from their friends and family. People ask, why do you think I'll be a good doctor? Do you remember when I first started getting interested in medicine? How was that? Et cetera, et cetera. And that just sort of gives you some new ideas and insight. The big thing is, though, that you just don't want to rush it. The AMCAS is due in early June, so I would say now is a great time to start thinking about what your topics are going to be for your personal statement and even to start drafting it. You don't have to come up with a final draft now, and lots of times people will kind of start multiple essays before deciding which one is really working for them. But for that exact reason, you do want to get started. So at Ingenious Prep, the way that we work is a lot of times we'll recommend that you kind of develop 3 different topics or themes before you actually start writing. And then once you've come up with these 3 topics, we kind of pause for a minute. We give you some space to think about it. We'll also think about it as your advisors. And then we can come back, rediscuss once we've had a little bit of time to think and get some clarity and really decide which of these is going to be the best choice for you. And the goals, again, all of these things that we've already kind of talked about. You want to tell the story. At the end of the day, you want your personal statement to tell whatever story it is that you feel like you need to tell for somebody to understand you. You don't want to feel like someone else is forcing you to write it. And you want something that's actually going to help your application. So your personal statement should give your application what the rest of the application is missing. So how do you actually get this idea onto the page? Again, people use different approaches. People have outlines. They write in stream of consciousness. People edit perfectly as they go. And we can help you. If you don't know what your writing style is, that's okay. We'll help you get there. We'll throw out ideas until we find one that works. But essentially, at the end of the day, it's going to all come down to what works for you. And so again, we would recommend that you get your first draft done early, that you make sure every paragraph has a purpose. This is something that I almost always do with my applicants. When I'm reading through their essays, I think, okay, what exactly is this paragraph telling me? And if this paragraph is not telling me something important, it shouldn't be here. And if this paragraph doesn't connect to the next paragraph, it either shouldn't be here, or it shouldn't be in this order, or there needs to be some sort of better connection between them. And that's a really good way. When you only have one page, make sure that every single paragraph, every single word counts. Don't list the activities that you've already listed. Don't go with famous but corny quotes. And this says don't use the synonym button. Honestly, I'm going to disagree with that to a certain extent. I think that you can use a synonym if it helps you. And it's only helpful if you know exactly what the synonym means, so you're using the correct term. But it's okay to, spice up the language every once in a while with a synonym. Once you have your first draft completed, you'll probably have multiple edits, and this will just be a slow process of sending these out to your family, to your graduate coach, to whoever it is that will take the time to read and listen. And obviously, it's ultimately up to you to decide what you take to heart and what you decide to leave as is. And then once you're ready to submit, always proofread one last time. Now there are more and more ways that people are detecting plagiarism. So if you want to run your essay through a plagiarism detector, that can be a great idea. You can either retype your essay into AMCAS or copy it, but just note that you should always make an AMCAS PDF, preview it, and read it again, because sometimes there are problems with the getting something over from like a Word document into AMCAS itself. So really quickly, I'm just going to kind of give you an idea of what we do as both former admissions officers and graduate coaches when we're actually working with you as a student. So we had a student last year, AW, and this was actually one of my students this last cycle. So he was very strong academically. He had a 3.8 GPA from one of the top 20 colleges. His MCAT score was great at 520. He had been involved in a lot of extracurricular activities, but they were things that you would often see within the med school application groups. They were shadowing, research, working as an EMT. He had, interestingly, switched from a business major to philosophy and neuroscience, and he was really nervous that this might negatively affect his application in terms of people looking at his commitment to medicine. And he was not that comfortable with personal writing. So one of the first things that I always do on the very first phone call that I'm meeting with my applicants, we kind of go through your story, where you're coming from, why you want to be a doctor, and we kind of look at a lot of the things that you've done in the last several years. And at the end of this first conversation, I always come up with a list of strengths and weaknesses for that particular candidate. So these are some of the things that we discussed with AW in terms of his strengths. Obviously his academics were great GPA, great MCAT score. He had a lot of varied experiences. He had good letters of rec from his philosophy professors. He'd shown some leadership, and he'd actually published some research. Some of the weaknesses were that he'd switched majors kind of late in the game at a time where it kind of seemed a little bit nebulous what his intentions had been, and also how it necessarily related to his desire to go to medical school. Also, a lot of his experience were sort of more typical, as we'd already discussed. He was also very concerned that he didn't have very good relationships with science professors. And so even though he had these great letters of rec from philosophy professors, he didn't have that same thing coming from a science professor. And then again, he wasn't that great at writing, or didn't feel that he was very good at writing. And, he was working in a competitive demographic. So, when we were choosing a topic, AW is really interested actually in sort of explaining a little bit more about his decision to switch majors. And so he used his personal statement as a way to talk about this so that he didn't have to worry about it as sort of a weakness in his application. He didn't want it to be something that was left unsaid. He wanted to just bring it to the forefront and talk about how that was related to his desire to go to medical school. So for all of our applicants, again, we encourage multiple drafts, and how many drafts people do will depend on the writer, but ultimately we're just trying to get you to have the best personal statement that you possibly can when you actually apply. So what this means is that every draft that you send us, we will read and make a lot of comments on. So that's done by both the graduate coach. The graduate coach reads a lot of the first drafts, and then ultimately the former admissions officer will come in and they'll give more high-level comments related to the overall strategy of getting into the school. So these are some of the comments that were written along the way about AW's essay. So, you know, this reads like a very temporal and linear retelling of your story, which isn't a particularly compelling way to convince someone why you want to be a doctor. So we go into the structure of your essay, we go into the content of your essay, all of these things to help you make it a stronger essay. And then we also made sure that the personal statement was used, as I've said many times before now, as a means of highlighting something that wasn't already evident in the rest of his application. Again, you want your personal statement to be an addition and a strength in unifying your whole application, not something where you're like, yes, you told me in your activities 7 times that you published something and now you're just telling me that again. And then ultimately, we'll kind of give you line by line feedback as well. And then, like I said, before you submit, the former admissions officer, we come in and we give even more generalized feedback as well as nuanced feedback. So AW had a very successful admissions he had a great success with his admissions this year, and he actually got into 2 of his top choices, which included Stanford and the University of Chicago.
All right. Thank you so much for telling us all about his case study and everything you need to know about personal statements. Here's a look at some of our acceptances, both this year and in the past year. We have UCSF, Duke, Stanford, Harvard, Cornell. So now I'm just going to quickly go over some of our programs and how we work with students. So first we have a program called Candidacy Building, and this starts as early as your freshman year of college. This is working with a student to help build up their candidacy to make sure they're the best applicant that they can be by the time that they apply to medical school. So this is early planning to make sure that they are doing the right activities in their undergrad, as well as planning maybe what they should do after they graduate college. So in this process, we help to identify their passions and codify their interests into tangible achievements that they can include in their application. Another service that we have is application counseling. So if you are applying to med school this cycle, then you should be starting this right now. This is the spring before you apply. In application counseling, like Ariana has been saying, we help with everything from your school list development to all different components of the AMCAS to the secondaries, as well as interview prep. For both of these programs, you're paired with both a former admissions committee member like Ariana, as well as a graduate coach for 2-on-1 assistance throughout the entire application process. We also do have interview prep packages. These take place during the application cycle. In this, we help with interview strategy, determining your strengths and weaknesses, as well as doing mock interviews with both a former admissions officer and a graduate coach. All right, so if you are hoping to apply to medical school, either this cycle or later on in the future, and you want to receive some concrete, detailed feedback on your candidacy for medical school, feel free to email me directly at grace.kennedy@ingeniusprep.com. If medical school is a bit farther down the line for you, you can always sign up for our newsletter, which provides like the latest medical school updates or news. So yeah, now we're going to open it up for some Q&A with Ariana. So you can use the Q&A function and start asking some questions. One question that someone asked that I was kind of interested about, and I'm not sure if well, actually, you probably know this, is that if you are reapplying to medical school, can you reuse your personal statement topic?
So if you're reapplying to medical school, you always can use your personal statement, but I think you have to ask, why are you reapplying? Are you reapplying because for whatever reason something changed in your life and you kind of ended up deciding that that time was not the best time to apply to medical school? Or are you reapplying because you did not get the interviews and ultimately the acceptances that you wanted to? Because if it's the latter reason, then I can tell you that some of that might have had to do with your personal statement. So honestly, while it's always an option, it's not one that I would almost ever recommend. And part of that is because if you are reapplying, one thing that you almost always have to address and should address just in your personal statement is why you're reapplying. And there are ways to do that without talking about, not getting into schools or not getting into interviews. And you do it by really talking about what you've learned over however long it's been since you last applied and how you are a much better candidate now.
Thank you. Okay, so now people are asking about more of the applications and how they're processed and compared. And a couple of people have asked about the pre-screening process, and they're curious probably about like score thresholds or cutoffs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so honestly, that's not something that we really do, and I don't know exactly what they are, but I think that you can kind of get an idea by looking, I think even on the AMCAS website, there's like an average GPA that different schools have and an average MCAT score. And I'm honestly not sure what, all the thresholds are, but I'm sure schools have varied thresholds, and some of them will be like a 3.2 or, things like that for your GPA. So I can't speak to exactly what they are. And I'm not saying that every school has them, but I will say that when you're getting hundreds and thousands of applications, something has to act as a filter. And unfortunately, those things that are very subjective, which come down to your scores, those are the things that are often used as a filter.
Mm-hmm. And kind of along that line, if you have like a lower GPA or MCAT score, how much can your personal statement compensate for this?
So I think your personal statement can definitely compensate for it, but I think there are a lot of other ways in your application that you can compensate for it. Sometimes there are reasons why your GPA might have been lower. Sometimes you took really hard classes that other people might not have taken. Sometimes you had a terrible thing going on in your life at that time. Sometimes you didn't adjust very well to college, but then as the years went on, your GPA got significantly better, but you just could never make up for the fact that your freshman year you failed that one course. So it's just a matter of figuring out what is kind of the cause of your problems with your GPA, and then figuring out how are we going to compensate for that. And I would say, for the most part, your personal statement would not be enough, but your activities can be. So coming up with how you're going to highlight the other things that you've done in your life that are real strengths outside of your academics, that's what's going to, allow you to still get into really great schools.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Okay, yeah, so I have a lot of people asking about the mental illness part of something to avoid on the personal statement. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I kind of avoided that because I feel like that's a little bit of a controversial topic. Mental illness is hard. I'm just going to be totally honest. I think that it's something that even in the medical community, there's still a stigma associated with it. So I just think that it's something that if you are thinking about talking about mental illness, if you're talking about mental illness in somebody else and how that's shaped your desire to go into medicine, I would say that's pretty much 100% fair game. If you're talking about mental illness in yourself, and this is not to make anyone feel bad, and I will say that mental illness within the medical profession is very high. There are more and more studies that are coming out that are talking about depression, that are talking about all sorts of other things, but the stigma is still very real. So I think that you have to be very selective and careful about what you say. I'm not saying, again, that it can't be in there, but I think that you would definitely want to work with somebody to make sure that it comes across as this might be something that you're dealing with, but you're still a very stable person who's capable of handling a very large stress load and, can make it through the med school process, which is very hard and emotionally draining.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. On the topic of stuff that you should avoid in the personal statement, would you not recommend mentioning anything like politically controversial or anything too personal?
Yeah, so again, I think it's all, I think you can't make generalized rules for these things. At the end of the day, the decision is going to be very nuanced. There are ways to talk about very controversial topics that really ultimately just express like your passion and sort of something that you've gone through in your life. And then there are ways to talk about controversial topics that are extremely offensive to half of the population, So it's all about how you present it. I think that, would it be my first choice for somebody to go for something that's like extremely controversial? Probably not. But you can definitely be somebody whose essay actually really stands out and is a lot more interesting if you can figure out a way to hone this very controversial topic to still feature things, to feature your strengths, so that even if somebody doesn't agree with you on your particular opinion, they can still see why you would be an amazing candidate for their school.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Okay, so I think we'll take maybe like one more question. And I think something that people were asking about was like the transcripts. How much do they look into detail about like if you have to withdraw from a class or if you have to retake a class? Does that hurt you at all?
So I can just say that at Harvard, we definitely looked at your list of classes and things like that. I can't speak for every school, and I can't say that necessarily was like the thing that decided whether or not you were going to get in or not. But things that we definitely looked at were, we definitely looked at your GPA. We definitely looked at the progression of your GPA. So like I said, better to have a bad GPA at the beginning and to improve throughout than to have a great GPA in your first 2 years and then tank your last two. That's trends are definitely something we look at. We looked at whether or not we thought you were taking a hard course load. So if you were, getting a 4.0, but you were taking, I don't know, like clown school and swimming, we looked at that differently than somebody who only had a 3.5 but was taking OChem with honors and et cetera, et cetera. So we definitely look at it. I think that if you have like a bunch of withdrawals, things like that, then that would definitely become suspect. If you're somebody who had one withdrawal, if you're somebody who retook one course, things like that, then I don't think you're going to get that much scrutiny for it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Okay, I think that will conclude our webinar. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Ariana, for taking time out of your busy life to talk about the medical school personal statement. If anyone has any more questions or, again, would like to talk about their medical school candidacy, feel free to email me at grace.kennedy@ingeniusprep.com. I will be sending a recording of this video out probably tomorrow. All right. Have a great rest of your night. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Good luck.